Okay, so hello and welcome again to another Frivolous Gravitas Extras video. My name is Christopher Driver, and as per usual, we're going to be going into some more JavaScript. Thankfully, now that we got the basics under wraps, we can deal a little bit less with the console and start doing some more visual practice with code. I find that, again, this is sort of like a supplementary type of tutorial, whereas a lot of the other videos I found, like I learned how to do all this through online resources, and those are all fantastic, don't get me wrong. But what we're doing here is learning how to play with code. So the best way to practice is to be able to play with it, whereas if you just, most of the other tutorials I see online, they just tell you exactly how to do it, perfectly the first time, and they show you one way of doing it, maybe a few little tweaks here and there. But then once the video's over and you want to go to your own code and start practicing, it's kind of hard to think of things to do. So what I'd like to show you is just all the different ways that you can kind of play with things and get a better idea of how to practice your code without being instructed or directed explicitly on what to do. So with that, we've got all the basics under wraps, so I'm not going to go into the setup process or anything like that. Again, the last few videos we were doing, the last one specifically in concurrency, we had to run a live server, and we had to use this type here under our script tag, had to be module, so that we could run our workers. But for this video, we're just going to be going right back to plain vanilla JavaScript, but I'm going to run the live server just so I don't need to keep hitting refresh. It's just going to automatically refresh the page every time I save, which just makes coding a bit easier. So I'm using VS Code. I've got a live server extension. You just find it up here, live server. This Renwick Day, specifically this live server runs JavaScript, so you want to make sure, not all of them do that. You want to make sure if you're using live server and VS Code like I am, and you're following along, that will be something to check for. And otherwise, I can just right click, launch my browser here, and Control-Shift-I for the console. Alternatively, you can hit the drop-down thing here, and where is it? DevTools, something like that. More tools. Developer tools, yeah. So Control-Shift-I opens this up, and that just gives you our page. So to set things up, I've actually set up a canvas element just to get us started, and I've given it an ID. I'm not giving it any specific details just yet. I'm going to fill those out with you guys. Don't forget the closing tag. And inside of our script, I've just set up a variable body to get my body tag, and that way I could just change the style on it so the background's black and the overflow is hidden. Sorry, I'm just going to keep this up. There we go. Now, what we're going to do today is we're going to play around with the canvas so we can see some more visual representations of our code. And the awesome part of this is after you get the basics of Canvas down, you can start doing animations and you can do like code-related visualizations, which is excellent fun. And it's an awesome way to practice math or geometry or anything like that that you want to do for school or for work or whatever you're doing. So to start off, I'm going to grab the canvas so that I can start manipulating it. So I'm going to create a variable called canvas and just document.get element by ID, and I've given it the ID of paint, as you can see up here. So from that canvas, I'm going to also need the context. So that'll be canvas, and then there's a built-in method for the context, and that's just get context 2D, I think. Yeah, get context 2D. And that'll just give us our reference frame for when we start drawing objects and lines and using coordinate systems from within the canvas. Context is just the word that says it grabs like the viewport basically of the canvas element so that you can start manipulating it and add things to it and move, paint or draw things to it. So these are basically boilerplate setup. You won't have to type it every time because you'll probably just copy and paste it, but rewriting it over and over again is the best way to practice and remember it. And then when you remember it, you don't need to think about like studying it for memorization. You just type it a bunch of times and it'll be stuck in your head after that. Because I don't want to keep writing out the word context though, because I'm going to be using it a lot. Every time you like move coordinates, you have to like start from context and then call a method from the context. So I'm just going to use the letter C, but I'll leave the word context up there just so you remember that it's not, because C isn't a very descriptive variable name, obviously, but it's just going to save me a whole bunch of typing. So the next thing I want to cover is just very, very basics. Within the canvas tag here, you can add things like width and height. I'm going to do it in code just because that's what I'm here to do, is practice with code. But the important thing to remember though with this is there are attributes which go inside of the tag, like our width and height go in here. That's going to define the resolution, like the resolution space of the canvas element that we're doing. And then using a style sheet or CSS like we've done before, I'm going to change that, and that's the actual what gets displayed on the page. So if you have like 1080p resolution on in the browser, like maybe your browser window is exactly 1080p, but your canvas is only 800 by 600, it's going to look pixelated when you blow it up. So it's a bit confusing to look at it first, but when you think about styles as being the representation of how it's displayed on the browser, and then attributes being the actual properties of the element that you're fixing or adjusting, that's like the resolution space or the context space that we're working with. And the important thing to note about that is I'm going to be making them the same just to make things easier with like mapping out coordinates and drawing things to the canvas. But if those sizes don't match, you're going to have to write some type of script or function to do that conversion for you. For example, if you've got an 800 by 600 resolution of your canvas, but you're drawing it on a 4K monitor, the coordinate systems for your mouse isn't going to match the coordinate space for the context. And you could write a simple function, but you'll have to call that function every time that you want to, say, map a point to where the mouse is clicked, because the coordinates are going to be different from the window coordinates relative to the screen space coordinates or the context coordinates of the canvas element itself. So to start off, then, I'm going to set my canvas to, maybe I should create... Yeah, okay. I'll set up the canvas first then. And after I set up the canvas and give it some dimensions, I'll set up the style. And after I set up the style so that it's displaying, maybe that'll be clearer. Actually, you know what? I'll make a little floating data box just so it's a little bit more straightforward. Sorry, I'm just sort of figuring this out as we go along. Okay, so I will start off with just our styles here. So, actually, I should probably, best practice, we'll start with best practice. So we're going to set up well, first we need the width and height. So let W equal our window object, which is just the main HTML page, and then the width is a property of the window object, so I can just call that directly. And of course, if I get the width, I'm also going to need the height. So, window.height. And now my width is going to be W. My canvas height is going to be H, and then that's for the canvas itself. That's the resolution space of the canvas element that we're putting into our HTML page. So I want the canvas to fill out the entire page too, so I'm going to change the style of it. Style.width equals w.px. Now the reason for converting this whole thing into a string, remember that when you concatenate a number to a string, the whole value gets converted to a string, and style sheets require strings be input. So you remember we did the same with like the RGBA, the color values, or things like that, but I'll do a bunch of them here so you'll get more familiar with it. But the height we're going to say is the same thing, plus px, because style sheets require a string with the units defined. And I also want this to have no margin. And I want it to have no padding. And that's because sometimes in the default, depending on how your browser's set up, you can have space or gaps around blocks or elements that you put into your web page. And I want everything to be flush against the screen, so the entire screen is going to be my canvas element. And that way, when I start making mouse events or mouse actions or anything like that, I can take the coordinates directly from the window and throw them into my canvas, and they'll be exactly the same. I won't like click here and have a dot show up way over here, for example. So that's why I don't want any margin or padding to it. I want to make the position probably not necessary, but it's best to be very explicit when you're writing code, just so that you don't get any unexpected behaviors. So the left position, I want it to be exactly 0. Like I said, I want it to fill up the entire screen without any gaps, and that means I want it to be sitting at the top as well. So 0. Keep in mind that with browsers, just because of the way old monitors used to run, they used to run their scan lines across the top whenever they're drawing or refreshing the screen. So just as a standard, we've carried forward the coordinate space starts from 0, 0 at the top left corner, and then counts up as it goes down on the y-axis, and counts up as it goes to the right for the x-axis. That's important to note because it's different from normal math. Normally you have, well, here, I'll just show you. Yep. Sure. Brush. Pencil. So normally you have the x-axis, and when you start, you go from this side all the way up. Whoop, up like that. But the way computers work is they start up here. So counting up on the y-axis will take you down because it's starting, the point of origin is up here. So I guess it'd be more accurate to say that we're working from this quadrant down from the top corner of the screen. No, discard. Go away. So what else? I'm going to give it a little bit of a background color. So I set the body background color up here to black and made the overflow hidden. That way I don't get any unwanted scroll bars, because the scroll bars will take up space too. And then again, that'll mess up my coordinate system a little bit. But just to see the difference between the canvas and the body, I might as well just change the background on the canvas as well. And again, we give it a string, RGBA, and I'll just give it sort of like an eggshell gray type of thing. The A in RGBA is alpha. That stands for the opacity, so that's a number between 0 and 1. So if you wanted it to be a little bit, actually I'll do that a bit later, because I'll draw some lines that have some opacity to them. I'm thinking for this practice, I want to do a bit of like a grid kind of thing, and that'll help us get a more visual representation of the screen space and the coordinate space that we're using. And I'm just going to give it a little bit of a border, and then you'll see, you won't be able to see my border unless I make it bigger, but I don't really want to see the border because again, that'll notice it kind of bulked out. Oh, here. Inset. We'll play around with it. Blue. Outset, maybe. I'm trying to make it a little bit more visible, but whatever. So the border's there, but I don't really want to see it. Okay, so that's just CSS for our canvas element to make sure that it's covering my entire page, which it is, which is good. So now I'm going to set up a little bit of a display box, I think. That way I can put the details of my window frame into a display box on the, just like a floating div tag, like a division tag. And I might as well do that in JavaScript, I guess. We could just add the div tag up here, but I'll write it in here. So what do I want to call this? Like display box, I guess? So document.create element, make it a regular div tag, and then I'm going to have to style this thing a little bit. So divbox.style position, I want to fix it. That way it doesn't move. So again, I'll just make a string, but this string has to represent a CSS value that it's expecting. So you can't just write anything. There's relative, static. So relative will position itself relative to its parent element. Static will just, I think that's the default. It just shows up in the order that it's entered in. So if you had typed in the element up here, it'll just make sure that it's in order and it won't really do anything funky. Fixed, it'll stay put, obviously, but even if you scroll, it'll stay in the same spot. So often fixed is what they'll use for like a navigation bar or something like that. And absolute. Absolute is what we used up here just to say no matter where it is, no matter where it's nested or what its parents are or anything like that, it's an absolute reference frame. So you can tell it exactly to go to 0 and 0, and it'll take the absolute value of them. Pretty straightforward. Displaybox.style, .position. It's that typing and talking thing again. So this one I'm going to position on the right because it'll be in my way if I put it. Sorry about that. Phone. So the display box is. I'm going to style this one on the right, and I'm going to keep the position fixed to it, but I got to give it some sort of, what do you call it? I got to give it some sort of dimensions so that I have room to put things in, but I'll just finish positioning this first. I don't know, 110 100 pixels. What was I saying? Oh yeah, I'm going to fix it, but I want to give it like a width and a height to make sure that it fits some data I put in there. And what I want to do basically is just have it up here in the corner floating around telling me exactly what dimensions I'm working with and things like that. Any kind of information I want it to I want to see for myself. Instead of throwing it in the console log and checking the console over and over again, I'll show you another way of doing it so it's a little bit easier. It's more visual. You can just temporarily leave a little div tag up there and it'll give you the info you want without having to dart your eyes back and forth, up and down in the console and on the page. We'll just print it directly to the page. So what am I doing? Width equals 200, 225-ish, something like that. You can change these numbers after. I just want to get something up there just so we can see that it's working. I'll give that 100 pixels for a height, and I'm going to give it a different background color because I want it to be noticeably different even without data in it, just so that I can see that it's working. Background is a shorthand for background color and some other properties, I think. That's something we could look up in the documentation, but I guess I'm going to do a separate episode on CSS anyway. So I guess for now, I'll just show you that there are two different ways of changing the background color. But they both essentially do the same thing, but one's shorthand if you wanted to add like, some other info to it. I think that's like I'll give it like a yellowish color, and these are just RGB values, anything between 0 and 255, where 0 is black and 255 is the red value, green value, blue value, and then that produces a color. But this one, I want to make it a bit transparent because it's going to be like an overlay. Like I do want to see it, but I don't want it to like, block off the screen entirely in case I've got a line or a circle or a point or something I've drawn behind it. And maybe I'll throw this into a function because this is going to get a little bit messy if I don't. I can do that after. I'll just set it up first. So what I need to do is take my body and append this new display box that I created. And you'll see right here, maybe I can make this darker. There. That's our div box. And I'm just going to put some canvas element details and stuff in there. So let's grab that canvas info. Canvas info. and I'll just make an object, just like we've done before. And I can call these whatever I want, but I'm just going to give them proper names because, you know, that's what makes sense. It makes it easier to code when your names actually reflect the things that you're doing. Oops, dot, height. And what else? I'm going to get the screen width and height as well. And the way I'm going to do that is get the canvas. Well, I can use the CSS that we entered into to set up the canvas. Remember, oops, the width and height that we put directly to the canvas up here is different from the style. The style is going to show how it displays on the page, and the width and height of the canvas element itself is like the resolution of the canvas. And I'm sort of repeating that because it's one of those complicated things that really took me a while to differentiate the two. And I mean, it's not that it's not explained when you check online. It's just it's hard to remember, and it's not well explained, I don't think. But maybe it's just me. I'm a bit of a slow learner. Okay, so I've grabbed that info. I can console log it to quickly check to see that I have no typos. And in here, you'll notice I've already got some data. So I've got 449 pixels and 449 pixels. Remember, screen H is my style. That's why it's in a string format. And you'll see these are also out of order because objects are different from arrays in that regard, where arrays are ordered lists based on indexes. Objects where you can set the property, the key value pairs, where you can set the name of the key that you want to pull out, those are always unordered. So that's why you'll see these probably bounce around if I refresh a few times. Maybe not. But they may move around because they're unordered. So now I want to display this in my display box. So how do I do that? I'm going to use a property called inner HTML. And it's one way, not the only way, but it's one way of setting HTML information into an element that you create. Remember, an element is anything that you wrap around with these angle brackets here. So to do that, what do I need to do? I need to display box dot inner HTML. And I'll give it a bit of a title first, I guess. So canvas info box. Because this is HTML going in here, I'm also going to want a line break. Otherwise, it'll just show everything, you know, crammed together, and it'll be hard to read. So display box dot inner HTML. See, now if I set just equals again, it's going to erase all this that I put in there. So what I want to do is plus equals, which is literally the same thing as just saying display box dot inner HTML equals display box dot inner HTML plus something. So I'll do both. But for the first one, I want to put in the width. So what did I call that? Well, yeah, I'll use text first. So canvas width, resolution width, because I want to differentiate the difference between the resolution of the canvas element and the resolution of my screen. That's sort of the point of making this little info box for us, is just to help us remember. So that'll be canvas info.width. And again, I want to make sure that breaks a line so that all the text that all the data that I put in here doesn't, you know, mix in together. And that means we'll do canvas resolution height. And I will add canvas info.height. Oops. Plus another break line. Again, this tag here is just HTML, so it's the old school way of adding or making a line break, a break line. Can't remember what they call it specifically, but okay. So I've got the resolution height. Now I need the screen. So screen width. And that would be, what is it? Yeah, canvas info dot screen width. Again, I need my line break. And I'm going to do the same thing with height. Height. So that should do me good. Nope, display bow is not defined. All right, I did it again. Try it again. Groovy. So if I zoom in a little bit, you'll be able to see our canvas info box. This whole thing is our div element, and I'm just adding HTML to it. And inside of my HTML, I wrote this here, canvas resolution width, but I used the information that I got from my from the screen and from the style to enter this data in here. And that's really useful when you're debugging, because you can just make a little floating window like this rather than, there we go. You can make a little floating window like this rather than having to deal with the console, right? So that's fun. Don't need that console log anymore. I guess I can put this way up here. Keep this all together. Let's start commenting our code, because we're gonna get confused fast. So set up the body. Call it the page body. And then I'm going to set up my canvas element. And so I'm going to get this part here gets the window width and height. This part sets the canvas resolution. And this part is sets canvas CSS styles. And for my display box, create and set styles on display box. And then this will be update data inside of display box. Cool. So that's a little bit easier to read. We can quickly skip through blocks of code that become cumbersome to look at. Actually, you know what we could do? We could just make a function for these right now. It'd probably be easier. We'll do it the old school way. So we'll do a make canvas function. And all of this canvas stuff. Yeah, I think I can take all of this canvas stuff. No, I'm going to need my context and my canvas. I'll keep those global because I'm going to keep reusing this one, right? And I want the window enter height and stuff to show up. So instead of make canvas, let me just do the make display box. Function make display box. So that'll be all of this, and all of this. Just scoot that in there. And then to run the code, you actually have to call the function, right? So make display box function called. And you'll notice nothing errored, nothing changed, so that's all good. And one of the reasons why you do this type of thing, especially when you're practicing with code, is that you can branch it off and then hide it. So it's really hard to read code when there's just like a wall of text in front of you, right? So sometimes it's best, once you've got something working, you can just set it aside, leave it compartmentalized, and you can just, if you need to look at it, you can always collapse it and open it after the fact. But yeah, now that we've created the display box, we don't really need to keep that open. So what am I going to do with my canvas here? I'm going to start by working with our context. And remember, Context is just a variable. You can make it whatever you want, but the way you grab the context is by getting the canvas element, which I've got here, pulled from get element by ID. And that ID I put up here just by typing in the actual canvas element, not inside of the script tag, but outside of the script tag. So this is HTML. I could have done the same as I did with this make display box function here, where I created the element in JavaScript and then I appended it afterwards. No different. You can do it the exact same way if you want, but just showing you a couple different ways of doing it. Usually you'll do it this way, because then when you're quickly reading through the page, you can just look at the elements. And if you want all the details of the element, like its description and all that, then you can go into code and look for it specifically. But there's no real need to create elements in the code, because it makes it harder to reason through or check the HTML after the fact, because it's just markup language is a much quicker way and more efficient way to scan through your page and see what's on there, and maybe find out what's not working or what positioning is not working. So let's just start by drawing a line. I could just use C, but I'll use context for the first one. Sorry about that. So I'm going to have to use some built-in methods here, and this is strictly to HTML canvas. But once you get the hang of things, it's not so bad, because they're more or less pretty well named. Not all of them, but I'm going to set my font here to be, well, I'll make it something that we can see. So it's like 20 pixels, and I'll use font name Verdana, for example. And I'm just going to have to fill text, I think, now. That's the fill text. So the first value in here is the text that you want to put in. So I'm going to say like coordinates 0, 0. Then after you close the quotations, like this string is the first value that this fill text method takes. And it's a method on top of the context. And remember, the context is what we grab from the canvas element by calling this method that's also built into canvas. So there's a bit of boilerplate, but again, you don't usually have to remember it, because you can just copy and paste that type of stuff from another file that you've got open, right? So generally you'll save templates or something like that, also called boilerplate, so you don't have to write the code. But if you want to learn this stuff, it's best to type it over and over again until you know it, because that's the only way you'll find out if you got errors or not. So the next two values are going to be the coordinates that you want this text to appear at. So I'm setting the context font to 20 pixels Verdana. Fill text method I'm calling on my context so that I get this text, and it says, where do you want to place this text? I'll say 0, 0. And if I just save that, oh, I should change my background. Yeah. Let's put this back up to 200, because I want to start drawing on here so I can see it. You'll notice I'm going to have a really hard time seeing my text because 100. Because 0, 0 is going to place it at the top corner of the screen. So my text is showing up way up here, and obviously it's going to be impossible to see. So if I hit 50, 50, then you'll see. But then my coordinates aren't 0, 0. So maybe I'll see if I can fit it in at 5. No. 15. Oops. There you go. So technically the dot's way up in the corner up here. But so that's how you throw some text in. Pretty simple, straightforward. Next I'm going to make some grid lines. Or maybe I'll just show you a line first. Yeah, we'll start with just a regular line. So context begin path. And then I'm going to need to close that path eventually. So, well, I can't even remember actually what it is. What is it? Canvas close path, something like that. Yeah, close path method. So we're going to take our CTX is sort of the industry standard, or I guess the tutorial standard. But so I'm going to start a path. I'm going to move my start position, so it's not going to draw anything to it. It's just going to like move a cursor, for example, to that coordinate space. And then I'm going to start drawing lines from one point to another, and then you close the path and then call the stroke method, and it's going to apply the stroke of the lines that we're drawing. So let's see if we can do this off the top of our head. So begin path, close path, then context, move to, maybe I will put this in the middle. So remember we got our width. I can just divide that by 2, so it'll take the whole screen width, and then my first point is going to be halfway between. And then I can take my height divided by 2 is just going to be the whole screen height, and then divided by 2 is just going to be halfway down the height. And I got to draw line 2 somewhere, so line 2 is the other method. I can just do w divided by 3, height divided by 3. Maybe I don't want to text this all again. So I'll copy that down and say width minus this, just 200, I guess. Yeah, sure. And minus 30. I'm not sure where this is going to go, but we'll see. So context.stroke is our final step. And you'll notice I've got a horrible shape here, but you get the general idea. Minus 30 is probably a bad one. Let's just say height minus 150. Maybe that'll be easier. No. Whatever. You can sort of see what it's doing. But it's hard to see what we're doing because we don't really have like grid lines or numbers or anything to show us like where our coordinate space is on here. I mean, I've got this, but 605 pixels and 1,114 pixels doesn't really mean much to me in my head. I want to do this visually. So basically what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to set up a for loop that takes the entire width of this window, and I'm going to divide it into chunks. So the first thing I'm going to need for that is to know what my grid spacing is going to be. If I just did one line every pixel, it would just make a black wall of straight lines all the way across the top and all the way across the side. So I want to make like a grid pattern that crosses, but I want there to be gaps. I'm going to call those grid spacings or something like that. But I'm going to start using the C instead of context, so I don't have to fill up my page with a mass load of text. But I'll do the alpha thing after. So let's just start with our grid. So we're going to have grid size, and I want that to be, say, like 50 pixels or something. Just a random number to start. Adjustable value. I usually write little comments like these in line with stuff that I can change later to play with things. Just as a quicker guide to figure out, like, for myself while I'm coding, to figure out what's changeable and what's not without having to actually read the code. So I'm going to take the width and divide it by the grid size, and that's going to give me the grid lines that I want, right? Or maybe that's the Y grid. Hold on. So if I take my width and divide, no, because I'm going to be, yeah, those are going to be the X grid lines. So the X value of my vertical lines. I guess my naming's probably going to be bad on this. I'm not sure what most people familiar with Euclidean geometry would use as variable names, but you'll have to bear with me. This makes sense in my head, so that's how I'm going to do it. So I need a for loop, and in that loop I'm going to go through I equals 0. And how many times am I going to do this? Well, I is less than grid lines. Yeah. Grid size. So the whole point of getting our grid size was so that I can do, for each iteration, I'm just going to, oh no, how did that work? No, that's what the lines is for. So X grid lines. Because I want it to do one drawing. I'm going to put the drawing in my loop here. I want it to do one drawing for every chunk that it goes across the screen, because I don't want it to print on every pixel. I just want it to print on every grid spacing all the way across. And then grid lines plus plus. So now I can do RC move to, and I can start this off with, that'll be I times the grid size. So for each one of my grid lines, my start position is going to be, at first it'll be 0, and then the second time it will be 50, and then the third, yeah, that's what I want. So the third iteration will do 150, and then the fourth iteration will be number 200. So my position X, is going to be my grid spacing, right? Because I want it to start in those chunks. And the Y position for my start line is going to be 0, because I want it to be right from the top, and I'm going to draw a line all the way from the top to the bottom. So C dot line, lowercase l for line, capital T for 2. And that'll be to the bottom. So that'll go to height, I think. That'll be my Y, but I'll want it at the exact same, yeah. So I want it to go from this position. That's like, let's say if we had a grid with like 5 lines, I want my first grid line to be like here. I want it to start at 0, and then the second point, like the line 2, is going to be from that same X dot, but it's going to go all the way down to the bottom of the page. And that'll be how I create a grid. And then because it's in a loop, every time it goes through, it's going to jump from I, whatever iteration we're at, multiplied by the grid size so that it skips all the ones in between. That'll be the position that it's drawing. And it's only going to do this for it's only going to iterate for as many times as we have grid lines in that space, because we took the width and we divided it by the grid size. So that means the number that we get here is the number of sections that we're going to be creating in our grid. And then of course I need to, well, let's change the stroke on this one, because I want to show you a couple other methods that, oh, that's actually not a method, it's a property. Show you a couple other methods of approach to drawing things and painting them and all that. Actually, I'll get rid of, no, I'll leave all that up. You can get rid of it after. So RGBA, and I'm just going to make this one black, and I want to see it, so I use 1 for the alpha value, and then stroke. That's the method I want. So when I save it, haha, it worked. So you can see I now have grid lines across my entire page, and it stops right here. Perfect, that's what I wanted. And then if I make the page bigger, it'll just dynamically keep changing the number of lines, but it'll keep the grid spacing the same. Maybe I should have called that grid spacing. But oh well. So now I need the horizontal lines. This should be very similar, so let's just have a stab at that. We'll start off with a let I equal 0, and while I is less than Y grid lines, because this time we're going to be doing it the other direction, and that means that our C dot, oh no, I should close path. Begin path. Since we're doing a tutorial, I should probably do this properly. Yeah, C dot close path. Uh-oh, doesn't work. Oh, it's because of this. Okay, good. So we'll begin a new path, and then just so I don't forget, I'll start off with close path, and then C dot move to. Now, we're going to do something similar this time, but on the x-axis. So that would be 0. Yeah, that should be the same, but with these reversed. So it should be 0 as the x coordinate, and then I times grid size for the y coordinate. just for our move to, and then after that I'm going to draw lines, so my line 2, and then what do I need for my X and Y? I want the entire width of the screen, and I want to stay at the grid size. I times grid size is that step position that we got, because we want to separate them, like these are separated by 50. But again, if I change that grid size, it'll change for everything, which is the nice thing about code, is that everything gets updated. I tried to save and refresh, but it didn't work because I didn't stroke it. Let's change the stroke style to it. We'll have one color going one way and one color going the other way. So red is 255, so I'll just say red lines going across, black lines going down, RG, green lines going across, red lines going down, or vice versa. Why didn't that work? Close path. I didn't stroke. C.stroke. These are kind of hard to see. Maybe I'll change that to 150. There you go. So you can see I've got my grid lines going down from X grid lines, and the reason I called it X even though they're going vertically is because X is the spacing I'm using, in case you're wondering. It's easier for me to reason about the spacing than it is to reason about the actual X and Y coordinates, because as I said, the browser's inverted. So the 0, 0 is up here and everything works down here. So 50, 50 would be right here, 100, 100 would be right here. Actually, let's just create a dot. Might as well, right? So I'll show you another method that we can use is the arc. So I don't know if I need a path for arc. Let's check. What do we call this? Canvas arc. Get out of here. Canvas arc. That's useless. What are you doing, W3 schools? This is definitely the best way to learn, is just by looking stuff up in the documentations, checking an example, and then playing with it. So yeah, begin path. I'm going to do it the way they do it. So C.begin path, and then I know for sure I'm going to want to close it, but I'm going to forget, so I'll write it first, and C.arc. Now with arc, it is taking in, what, 5 arguments? Yeah, 5 arguments. So with arc, you need the X, the Y coordinates to position it. You need the radius, because every circle's got a radius, and that's how it figures out where to paint and what to paint. You need, actually, I got the documentation up, I'll just check it. I'm trying to do it by memory. So that value is going to be in radians. The first parameter that you use is the X and the Y coordinates. Those are separated by commas, of course, and then comma radius, and then the starting angle, and then the ending angle, and then the optional is clockwise. So I don't think you actually need to put them all in. You can, it'll assume the angles, but here's some idea of how they're going to render and paint out. But I'm pretty sure you can do it without telling it the start and end. But let me double check. So we're going to position this at 50, 50. I'm going to give it a radius of, we'll just reuse our grid size. Now this part is what you're going to have to do every time you draw a circle. You're going to have to, if you don't remember or know it, radians work on a unit circle, and a unit circle starts from one side and goes all the way around at 2 pi. And the reason for that is the formula for circumference, if you remember high school algebra, is 2 pi. What is it? 2 pi r? Yeah, 2 pi r. So the unit circle is based on a circumference. And the reason that's useful is because radians work in that same degree. So if you just say math times 2 pi, you know exactly that this is going to be a complete circle and not a partial one, like these are. but it sounds a little bit complicated, and the reason why it's not is because if you just wrap these in parentheses and divide it by any number, you can create other shapes based on a unit circle. Like you could make a triangle using a for loop that has 3 points, and you just divide math.pi times 2, take that whole chunk and divide it by 3, and you've got 3 points of a triangle around a unit circle. And then you can scale them as big as you want, because the radius is always 1 from a unit circle. That's the unitary part of the circle. But for now, I'm just going to do math.2pi. So I've got 4 arguments. I think that'll paint on its own. I don't think it needs... Oops. Oh, it does need that argument. Well, there you go. I wonder if I just put true. Ha! It'll take true, but it won't paint. Oh, I didn't fill. That's why. So we could do... Before we did stroke, to call it, we can do that again on here. Oh, it only gave us a quarter of it. That's funny. Okay, so what did it tell us we had to do? Should actually read the documentation. So start angle, starting point on the circle. Oh, okay. So I will just put a 0 in here as my start angle. My finish angle will be the math.2pi. And then the optional argument is clockwise or counterclockwise, but in our case it doesn't matter, but I'll just put it in there just to remind us that's available. And look at that, we've got our full circle. And the reason why I painted there, remember, is because 50 is our grid size. I could have just as easily put grid size in here. I don't know why I didn't. Grid size. And it'll paint in the same spot. But now when I change my grid size to 150 pixels, everything changes. And that's the really phenomenal part about practicing with code, is because making changes everything automatically on the fly. And you can make some really cool shapes and stuff with that too, because you can run loops that do paints and stuff. So that's what we're going to get into. But instead of stroke, I'm going to show you the fill. And that's going to be a little bit hard to see, so let's change our fill style too. Fill style equals RGBA, and this time I'll make it a black, but I will give it an opacity. So 0.25 means that it's only going to be 25% visible. And you'll notice that it has changed. So yeah, cool. So times 3 times 2. And you can move it around or whatever like that. So all the neat things that you can do with Canvas. So these lines are kind of bugging me actually, and I want to do something a little bit fancy with them. I want to see if I can create a line that, based on the loop, so how far it is from the 0, I want to change its alpha value. This one, oh no, that's the background. Here, I want to change this number. So how would I go about do that? Well, I'll probably need a variable to keep updating. So let's call that alpha, just so that it's easy to remember. And I'll start it off at like 0.25. Now I'm going to want to put in here. So I'm going to change these quotation marks to those backticks. That's the key right below the escape key on your keyboard. And the reason I'm doing that is because I can put in a template literal. So I can throw a variable directly in my string. It's no different from concatenating, like if you just did this plus variable. So it's no different from doing that, but it's easier to read and logic through, because I can just put it straight in the string without having to separate anything, or, you know, have a whole bunch of pluses and a whole bunch of strings and sort of like soup them together like pasta. I can just throw it straight in the string, but you have to use the backticks to be able to do this, and the syntax for it is this $, open and close curly braces. So, no, I don't want I in here, I want the alpha, because that's the whole reason I'm making this variable here, because every time I run through this loop, I'm going to change that variable so that it changes my alpha. So what I want to do is alpha minus equals, what do I call that? First, what am I doing? I want it to fade out. So based on the number of grid lines, yeah, so based on the number of grid lines, X grid lines, okay, I'm trying to do it all in my head, but maybe that won't work. Let's just do it up here. So I'm going to make a fade effect. And that's going to be two things, because I'm going to have the fade effect for my vertical lines, and I'm going to have the fade effect for my horizontal lines. So I'll just make an array, and I'll do them both at the same time. So I need my alpha, I'm going to divide it by the number of grid lines. X grid lines. That'll be the first value. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the 0.25 and I'm dividing it by the number of lines that I've got across here. So the other one will just be the exact opposite. So it'll be alpha divided by y grid lines. And then down here, I change this to fade effect. And for the first one, I'm going to use the first index, and for the second one, I'm going to use the second index. So I'll just paste that in here, and I'll change the index. I can't remember what this value was before, but we'll set that to 150, set that to 50. What happens if I change that to 1? Nope. So something's not going right. Let's see. Oh yeah, I do want alpha in here, because alpha is going to be changed by the fade effect. That's what I'm doing. Sorta got ahead of myself here. So alpha minus equals our fade effect. And then I move that down here with a 1. So our fade effect is basically the number I want to reduce this by. That's what I'm getting here. Because if I just reduced it by like a hard-coded value, then every time I change the size or the grid size or something, I'd have to re-change the hard-coded value. So what I'm doing with this fade effect is I'm just sort of storing a value that I want to incrementally decrease my alpha by. And I was kind of hoping that would just work. I wonder if I have to move that below the fade. Okay, let's just try it with black lines first, because maybe the color's tripping me up. There we go, so I can kind of see it. I just need to start with a bigger number, I think. Oh, you know what it is? I got these reversed. That's probably why. Because, like, it's sort of working. You can see my fade working, but I want it to, like, still be visible out here. And it's fading too quickly. So I thought maybe I had the width and the height mixed up, but I don't think I do. Alpha divided by the grid lines is the first value, and that would be the 0 index. So I'm saying alpha equals itself minus the fade, and the fade is going to be, the last line is going to be 0, so everything before that should have some sort of alpha value. Here we go. I gotta change this here, because I'm decrementing alpha, and then I'm not reinitializing it. So after it goes through this loop and goes down to 0, I need to tell it to go back up to 0.5. But now I'm writing the same code twice. So anytime you write code twice, it's a clear sign that you should just write a function for it. So I'll call it reset alpha. And then in here, I'm just going to say alpha equals start value of alpha. So I'll say let alpha, just to say like, you know, be a thing, I'm going to use you later. And then the start value of alpha is going to be the number that I can change. So I'll say this here, adjustable value, just as a mental note to remind myself I can change it. So now I've got this function, and all I have to do is call it reset alpha. And then I'm going to use it again down here, and I can get rid of this. Start value of alpha. But now this doesn't work because I didn't set start value of alpha. So let's just do this. Alpha equals start value of alpha. Or no, I'll just push my reset alpha up here. That works. There we go. So you notice how my lines start, they start at 0.5 opacity, so they're not full blown. There, I'll just show you what one looks like. So perfectly strong opacity up here, and then as it goes across and down, they're slowly kind of dimming. So there's like a fade effect that we got just by running our loop and changing our opacity values, which is, I don't know, maybe I'm just weird, but it's kind of neat. So we've got this art. Let's see if we can do some stuff with the mouse now, because we're good at drawing, but we want to do something a little bit more interactive, right? It's not the most fun to just sit and draw things line by line by hand. So yeah, let's start working with it. Or no, I'll make some points first, just so we can kind of see where everything is. But maybe, yeah, I'm gonna make a function to make a point. I'm getting there, don't worry. So we'll say make point is going to be a function. That function is going to take in an x and a y coordinate. And inside of that, I want to begin path, and that means I'm going to need to close path at some point. Let point size. And this will be another adjustable value, so every point's going to need a size, but I just want to make a standard size, and we can change all that after, but just so that I can hard code it in here, and I can just change it in one spot instead of changing it for every point we draw. Oops. C.arc. Now this function is going to take in xy coordinates. That's why I've got these two up here. And we're going to use those to draw onto our canvas. And we're going to get those XY coordinates from our mouse, and we'll tie an event listener to the canvas that says, hey, when you click fire this event is going to have our mouse coordinates in it. We're going to use those mouse coordinates and pass them into this make point function, and then we'll have a function that makes points. That's sort of where I'm going here. So our radius, what's our radius? That would be our point size. And then math.pi, and that's a capital P and capital I. Usually it's just the first letter that's capital, but for some reason they chose pi to be both capital. So what do I got? I got 4 arguments here, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. But don't I need 5? I need the start. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. So I need a 0 here. So start from 0, math.pi times 2, that makes a full circle from 0 to this. And then we can do it counterclockwise if we want, so I'll just set true. Again, you can just check the documentation, it'll tell you exactly what you need. So you starting angle, ending angle, clockwise. Those are your 5 parameters that you throw into the arc method that goes onto your context, and the context is grabbed from the canvas element that we did from the beginning. So going back to here then, I want to close the path. I need to stroke too. C.stroke. So that it actually draws the thing. You know what, let's change the stroke style, just to be fun. Stroke style equals RGBA. Let's make a blue one. So red is 0, green is 0, blue 200. And A1 because I want to be able to see it. And then let's fill it. Now since I'm printing these, I might as well print some text with my coordinates too, because then I can print out exactly what the coordinates are. Yeah, let's do that. So how did we do text? Fill text, that's what it was. So fill text takes in our text as one argument, and it's the x and y. So x, y for the other two arguments. But I want these to show up a little bit below, because like if I hit it at the point, the text is going to be like right on top of my circle, and then it's probably going to be hard to see or something, right? So I'm going to put a little bit of an offset. Oh, I'll just call this offset. That way I can change it later too if I want. So let offset text equal, we'll call it 15. Yeah. Adjustable value. And then down here I called it offset, but I should have called it offset text to be a little bit more specific. And I think that I don't need the pixels because it's not a style. This is just JavaScript. So in the styles we had to convert it to a string by adding the px at the end for the units, but we don't need to do that inside of the fill text because this is just a JavaScript specific method. It's not referencing anything from the DOM or the document object model like cascading style sheets would be. Actually, instead of using double quotes, I'm going to use the backticks again, on the key underneath the tilde, underneath the escape key, because I'm going to use just our variables that we entered, because I want to be able to print the text of our variables. So I'm going to say x coordinate is this, y coordinate is the same thing but with y. And again, I'm just taking these variables from whatever gets passed into this function when we want to make a point. And then every time I want to put a point on the screen here, let's make the point size a bit smaller because that might be too big. Oops, 25. Every time I call this function, I'm going to give it an xy coordinate. It's going to create a circle, put it at those coordinates, give it the standard point size, which is 25 in our case, starting angle of 0, ending angle at math.pi times 2, because that's how you make a circle all the way around. And true just says counterclockwise or clockwise, but it doesn't matter. If you're drawing a full circle, it's always going to be a full circle, no matter which direction you go from, but just friendly reminder that the option is there. I'm changing the color of the stroke, and that's the outline that I'm drawing. Fill is going to take this arc and fill it with a color. You can also change the fill style, like fill style equals, I don't know, what color haven't we used yet? Well, here we go. Use a hexadecimal code. Show you some different ways of changing color. So fill text, that should work. Now if I call make point and I give it 2 coordinates, there you go. It just pops it in there. Look at that. The color's kind of hard to see though. This EEE thing's not working for me. Let's try 333. There you go. See, remember how I said like the point is starting from the middle here, but my text is hard to read because it's covering part of that circle. So I'm going to change the offset here to be a bit bigger just so it's easier. And you'll notice this XY changed and moved over. So now we've got a point on here. But the cool thing we can actually start doing with this is adding event listeners. So if I say canvas.add event listener, and this event I'm going to listen for is the string click, and this has to match event listeners as we talked about in prior videos. So thanks to having all of the thanks to having the background of 5 other introductory videos, now we can just get straight into it. So when I do the click, I'm going to have a console log our event, and I want client X and client e.client Y. Just the console to make sure everything's working. And you'll see as I change and move things around, I'm getting a console printout of the XY coordinates from my screen space. This is actually being called on the canvas, so technically it's the canvas space, but because we've stretched out our canvas to the entire size of the screen, and we've matched the dimensions of our screen and our canvas, I don't have to do any math or anything to convert the coordinates from the window, from the screen space to the element itself, or back and forth. So it makes it a lot cleaner and easier just to run through as you're learning it. But then as you go along, obviously, there'd be no difference from just doing this and wrapping this in a function. Like if you had a standard function that converted everything for you, you'd just use it one way. And then if you're converting from element space to screen space or back the other way, you just use a different one. So foo going one way and then bar going the other way, or whatever you want to call it. But we've avoided that by making everything uniform. So I don't need the console log. What I want to do is make a point, right? So every time I click, I'm going to pass in the X and Y coordinates of the mouse into my make point function. And that function is going to use those XY coordinates to create a circle and fill out some text and give us some data from those coordinates, which is nice and handy. So if I save that, you'll see as I start clicking around, I can tell exactly what my coordinates are. And it'll give you a good frame of reference for how everything's set up with the canvas, because it does take a little bit of getting used to, with the 0, 0 coordinate being on the top left, because you're basically working from the 4th coordinate instead of from the 1st. But if you wanted to change that, I think there's an easy way of doing it just with translate. Yeah, I think I can translate the context. If I just take I'll try it. I'll see what happens. Translate, and then we'll take the width divided by 2 and the height divided by 2, and then that should center it. But we'll have to do that way up here to notice the difference. Further up. Let's try it here. There you go. So if you wanted to work with this is 1st coordinate, 2nd coordinate, 3rd coordinate, 4th coordinate, you could just take the context, that view thing that we keep drawing from, that's C, which is also the same thing as context, but I just shortened it. And we got the context by taking the canvas and calling this getContext method. And context is that paint view or whatever. It's the drawing board we're using. Canvas is the name of the element, the program that we're writing our scripts into. That's where we get all these methods from, the fill text and the fill and stroke style. That all comes from built-in HTML5, the canvas element. But the context, when we grab that, we can translate and move that around. Translation is just taking an object and then sliding it around. Rotation is this. Scale is this. Translation is this. So yeah, you can just translate the context. You can also scale it, I guess, if you really wanted to. Oops, squale. I bet if you scaled it by 2, no, I guess that doesn't work. But I could take the canvas and scale it. Or maybe it's a transform. See, transform. I'm just playing around here. Don't copy this. No, it doesn't let you. But anyway, I'm going to keep working from this top left here because I think we got a good thing going here. We could also make some random colors, right? So let's make a function that changes the color. Color changer. And every time I call this function, I want it to change some colors. So I'm going to say colors. And I need 3 numbers for my color. and they're going to be in a range from 0 to 255 for RGB values. So I can just do like we did before with our math.random, multiply that because it gives us a number between 0 and 1. The most it can give us is 1, and 1 times 255 is 255, so there's no way it can be out of our range if we just multiply it by 255, which is what we want. But we don't need all those trailing points, so I'm going to show you another math method, which is round. So I'm going to take math.round, and it's going to say round what? Give me an argument inside of these parentheses. I'm going to give it the argument. Oops, I meant to space this out. It says, give me one argument. So the one argument I give it is math.random times 255. And that's going to give us our rounded random number between 0 and 255, which is exactly what we want. So I'm going to assign this to colors. Actually, don't need to do this, but I could. Let counter equal 3. While, I'm just going to write a little bit of a loop here. So while counter is less than, greater than 0. So it'll be 3, 2, 1, 0. No, then I'm going to run 4 times. So I'll set this to 0, say less than 3. So then it'll be 0 will be the first run, 1 will be the second run, 2, yeah, so I want 2. 0, 1, 2, yeah. So I'm going to make a loop that just populates our colors array. So colors equals nothing, because whatever was in it before, because they're going to call this a bunch of times to keep changing the color. So whatever was in it before, I want it to wipe that clear, and then colors.push. Oh, but you know what? I only need to clear it once, so I'll move that outside of the loop. So whenever I call this color changer function, it's going to take this, so I can just immediately call color changer on here right away, because I'm going to want to populate it with something. Counter is going to do this, but I have to adjust my counter or I'll get stuck in an infinite loop. Counter plus plus. So every time this loop goes through, counter increments, pushes on another random color between 255 rounded down. I think that'll do what I want. Console log. Just to see that it's working before I try and plug it in. Oh, it only gave me 2. So yeah, I had it right the first time. 3. There we go. And you'll see every time I run it, I keep getting new numbers down here. So how are we going to use this? Well, I've got 3 numbers in here that I can change every time with my stroke style, right? So every time I make a point, I want to call color changer. And then I'm going to use those backticks again up here so that I can use a template string literal, which is the word for using that $sign in the curly braces so that you can use variables inside of string text and just makes it easier to read. Again, it's the same as concatenating, but it's just cleaner, because if you concatenate, you got to do like open and close quotation marks plus your variable plus open and close quotation marks plus your variable plus, and you know what I mean? And it just strings out too long. So I'm going to do it the simple way, which is this colors, and that'll be the first one. Now I can just copy and paste this because I hate typing that. Paste, that'll be 1, and then paste, that'll be 2. So remember, arrays work from index of 0, so I have my 3 colors here, 0, 1, and 2 are the indexes. This last trailing one here is the A, the alpha, the opacity value of the color that I'm putting in. Where else can I do it? I'm going to take this whole thing, copy that, and throw it in here. But let's get a new color every time. So color changer, we made a function, so let's reuse it. So nothing happened, but if I click, I should start getting different colors. But my fill style hasn't changed. Let's change that too. Cool. So for one last thing, I'll just show you some yeah, I'll show you how to clear it, because when you're running animations, you're going to have to clear it for every frame. You're going to have to clear the screen. So let's do that. How do I want to do this? Canvas.add event listener. So I'm definitely going to need a listener, but I don't know what I'm going to do yet. The listener is going to be for a, say, key down. Oh, I keep forgetting I don't need the you don't need opening and closing parentheses for the arrow functions unless you have more than one variable in them, but I always put the parentheses on anyway, but I guess I should show you the other ways. Or not key down, let's do Mouseover or something, yeah. Let's kind of do something that paints a bit. So make point, yeah, I'm just doing this, so copy and paste. And you know, I'm going to set a delay on it just to have something to do. So again, practice filling things in different ways. You know what I mean? Just to know what you can and can't do with the language. It's the best way to learn, in my opinion. So I'm going to set a timeout, which we've done before, and then the second argument of the timeout is a delay. So I'm going to put a 350 millisecond delay, and it's going to create a point every time I mouse over the canvas. But I think I have an error here. Where is that? So set timeout ends there. Where's this closing bracket? Ah, that's where I'm missing one. Right there. Again, handy thing about having an IDE, because you can get lost in these open and closing curly braces. Add event listener. Listener. Mouseover only triggers once every time you mouse over, so let's try a different one. I was trying to get it to mouse move, I think is what I wanted. Yeah, there you go. So now it's calling this function every time the mouse moves over top of the canvas, and that means like every tiny little nudge. But I put a 350 millisecond delay so the mouse doesn't distract you, otherwise your mouse would be covering it. But if I didn't put the delay on, it does the same thing, but your mouse is right on top of the color, so it's a little bit distracting. I like the delay. But we're going to want to clear that because it's going to get really messy. So let's just add a set interval, and I'll show you clear rect, and that way the next training video we do, we can start doing like full board animations in Canvas, because it's got a built-in render function that requests animation frame that recursively calls itself. So thanks to all of the practice that we've done with like function calls and recursion and events and data types like arrays, so we can manipulate things like color values and stuff using arrays and random numbers and built-ins and things like that. Now we can get into the more fun stuff, which is animations. So if you've made it through this long, that's why we've been doing it. So set interval to call a function, and then what's the interval? I'll say every 5 seconds. And all it's going to do is I think clear rect, and then 0, 0. So I'm going to give it the coordinates to start from, and it's going to create like a box that it clears. So it's going to wipe out everything that we've painted on the canvas at every interval of 5 seconds, so that it doesn't, so it erases everything basically. And that's how we're going to makeshift frames when we do animations, is that every time the animation is called, it's going to repaint one frame, but before it does anything, it's going to have to clear from the frame before it. Otherwise, the page just gets really messy really fast. So clear rect from that point to the width and the height, because I want it to go from 0, 0 all the way to the end of, I'm off camera, the end of the screen to the bottom of the screen. Or I guess the camera's reversed, so it'll be there. That way, and then that way. Save. Every 5 seconds, it should just, wipe itself clean. And don't forget, the reason why this div element is still up here is because it's not part of the canvas. I had that as a fixed division tag from the HTML page. But yeah, cool. If you wanted to, you could have it stop and start with like a click action or something just by setting a boolean. A boolean is just a true or false value, so let should paint equal true, and then this interval you could say pull this clear rect only if should paint is true. So what you could do with like a conditional statement like this is say sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So with the should paint equals true, and I'm going to set it to true from the start, I want it to clear rect and then else, I don't know, do nothing. Yeah, and then on my click event, on mouse move on click, here we go. Up here, oops, I gotta move this higher. So up here I'll say should, how am I gonna, we'll use inline if. That's way easier. This is basically what these inline ifs are for, and I almost forgot about them. So should paint equals should paint question mark. So if it's true, set it to false, and if it's false, set it to true. So now when I click, I should be able to turn off that interval, and the paint will just keep running. And then if I click again, that interval should turn on and start erasing. And then I click again, it'll stop erasing. So now it just keeps painting and painting and painting. And if I click again, it'll start erasing again. Every 5 seconds, that interval gets triggered. So yeah, fun with paint. Hope you enjoyed. Stay tuned for more. We're going to start animations next time, hopefully. Might do libraries, actually. We haven't done CSS either. We should probably do a quick CSS. Maybe I'll make like a 20-minute CSS video or something. But anyway, stay tuned. Check out the podcast, Frivolous Gravitas. We're not asking for money or anything, so show your support by likes, throw comments in the YouTube algorithm, blah, blah, blah. Tired, need food. Thanks for watching.